Welcome, and thank you for joining the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, or IFES, in this discussion series about democratic resilience in Europe during the pandemic. IFES is a non-profit, non-governmental organization that assists electoral processes broadly defined across the world, and we have supported elections in European countries since the fall of the Iron Curtain. This is the 13th installment in our series, and so far we have covered issues from election administration, inclusion, cybersecurity, disinformation targeting women in politics, and abuse of state resources. I'm Magnus Öhman. I'm the IFES Senior Political Finance Advisor, and I'm also Director of the IFES Regional Europe Office in the Czech Republic, and we are hosting this discussion. This event is part of a larger USAID-funded program of democracy assistance, with the goal of supporting leadership that champions democratic practices and is made possible through the support of the American people. So today we will focus on Russian politics, including the elections that took place just last weekend. What do elections mean in Putin's Russia? And where is Russian politics heading? How should we understand the elections that just took place, given the absence of international election observation, and given the event that happened before, during, and after election day? To help us understand these issues, we have with us a panel of experts. I'll first turn to Anthony Bowyer, who is a Program and Research Advisor, Europe and Eurasia, at the International Foundation for Electoral Systems. We'll then talk to Katerina Tertytchnaya, who is Assistant Professor in Comparative Politics at the Department of Political Science, University College London in the UK. We will talk to Roman Udot, Co-Chairman of the Movement for the Defense of Voters' Rights, also known as Golos, and we'll discuss with Stefanie Schiffer, Executive Director of European Exchange. We'll then open for questions and for discussion. If you do have any questions, you can already now type those in using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So first, I want to turn to Anthony Bowyer from IFES. Anthony, we know a bit about the regime in Russia, but what can we say about the state of the electoral opposition and the political opposition generally?
Yeah, thank you, Magnus, and good afternoon, good morning. Thanks for having me today. Let me start by saying that, of course, we know the ruling United Russia Party won 324 out of the 450 seats in the Duma, which was down 19 seats from the previous version of the Duma, but they still retained a supermajority, allowing them potentially to push through additional constitutional amendments, such as they did last year, which may allow President Putin an opportunity to run for 2 additional terms, 6-year terms, beginning in 2024, if he indeed decides to do so. If we look at the non-United Russia parties who competed in these elections, first we'll start with the opposition, really legitimate opposition parties such as Yabloko, which did not surmount the 5% barrier for the proportional representation component of this election, nor did any Yabloko candidates prevail in the single mandate majoritarian contests. There were gains by the Communist Party. Now, if we move into what we can suggest as opposition, but really not. The Communist Party's popularity had been trending upwards in the weeks prior to the election, as well as those for a Just Russia, another party that is, in the end, will be supportive of United Russia. And again, these can't be considered true opposition parties. They do tend to support the ruling party, and there are exceptions to that. For example, the very controversial decision to raise the retirement age for workers did draw rebukes from these parties in the last Duma. Another party that I think the jury is somewhat still out on is New People, which gained 13 seats. Its debut in the parliament. This party claims to be devoid of the ruling, of connections to the ruling regime, and sees itself as a genuine democratic opposition led by business-minded individuals. Others see it largely as an effort by the ruling United Russia Party to inject new young politicians into the legislature, though nominally under a somewhat different banner. And there were projects that United Russia had undertaken prior to these elections to create and build up certain proto parties. So we'll see indeed if they are one of those in the end. Looking again at the Communist Party for a minute, it's important to understand that I think some of the increased support this party received, in addition to maybe having some jump in popularity support ahead of the election, may have been due to the smart voting app that the former, I guess we can say, opposition leader Alex Navalny had developed, which encouraged voters to support the strongest candidates in their local jurisdictions and parties who were not United Russia. This may have resulted in a jump or a benefit to the Communist Party by 5 to 7%. However, the app was actually banned the day before the 3-day voting period on September 18th as a result of pressure exerted on Google and Apple by the Russian government, and we'll talk a bit more about this later. Looking at other parties that are in parliament that we can say are opposition to some degree, but then again not. The Liberal Democratic Party, led by Vladimir Zhirinovsky, lost 18 seats, almost as many as United Russia. And in fact, LDPR and the communists did file complaints with the courts and the Central Election Commission alleging malfeasance, particularly as concerns the limited use of internet voting in 7 regions in Russia. That were certainly not, was a process that was not terribly transparent. In the end, I think we have a somewhat weakened ruling United Russia Party. There are other parties that made it into parliament with one seat apiece. These are Rodina, Party of Growth, and Civic Platform, as well as 7 self-nominated candidates through the majoritarian component. If we look at the results, again, United Russia just won just under 50% of the vote in an election that saw 52% turnout officially, although some statisticians believe that these numbers were far lower and suggest that perhaps United Russia received only maybe 31% of the vote with an actual turnout of 38%. We know that United Russia's popularity has been dropping nationally, and some oppositional candidates have made gains at local or regional levels. Nonetheless, United Russia remains firmly in charge and will continue to be a vehicle used in advancing President Putin's agenda going forward. I do think these numbers also reveal a degree of voter apathy. People who are angry at the ruling party perhaps didn't turn out to vote or express this at the ballot box, while others who did vote for United Russia perhaps do so in order to preserve a sense of continuity in government and preservation of the social order, rather than risking uncertainty or the possibility of instability, which nobody at the end of the day wants.
So looking at the voting we've just went through, what trends do you see in that, a signal, well, either a change or continuity in the State Duma?
Well, I think the results on the surface suggest a continuity in government and support for President Putin's agenda. Again, as I just mentioned, for many of the voters, continuity in government and the social order was paramount, even if the ruling party has in fact lost popularity. In addition, has certainly intensified restrictions of the media, civil society, and closed political life generally. And continues to be associated with corruption and mistrust, including missed or late salary and pension payments, and other types of issues. As mentioned, this whole issue of the pension retirement reform was a big deal, and people are very unhappy about it. It raised the retirement ages to 60 and 65 for women and men respectively. Also to underscore, I think, again, the gains by the Communist Party may be seen in terms of a protest vote of sorts, even if this party ultimately backs United Russia's agenda. I think these are the 4 kind of key parties: a Just Russia, the Liberal Democratic Party, the Communist, and United Russia, which are returning. And as mentioned, the other maybe significant party, we'll see what happens, New People gaining 13 seats. I think, again, it also suggests that there is it seems an agenda for continuing to repress opposition. And as we know, Alex Navalny's political organization was declared an extremist organization, and banned from fielding candidates, as he himself languishes now in a over 2.5-year prison term for violating his probation. One of the other points to make is that the parties and candidates this year were newly mandated to declare whether they had any foreign agent connections, and this foreign agent law has expanded in Russia. In other words, had they received support from external entities? And they had to declare this, and in doing so, this kind of served as a warning label on their candidacies to voters for those parties or candidates who were deemed undesirable because of this foreign agent connection. So again, we have a supermajority maintained by United Russia. I think that's the immediate takeaway. I think at the end of the day, what is this truly a mandate going forward, or are we seeing signs of erosion, particularly when we consider that a majority of the electorate now has been born after the end of the Soviet Union, and they're looking for change. These are heavy users of the internet. These are individuals who are very active in social media, and they don't necessarily buy into the United Russia agenda.
Thank you very much. Briefly, I'll ask you a very simple question. How does the election impact Russian domestic and international policy?
Well, I think we're going to see a continuity of the domestic and international political agendas purported by the president, again, with his supermajority in parliament backing him. But I think at the same time, the president understands there's real anger in the country. There's been an increase in the prices of basic commodities in spite of price controls that have been imposed by the government. There's been a falling standard of living. There's the issue of corruption and unemployment. It may be a possibility now, sort of between this election and the presidential election in 2 years' time, if the president decides to run, that he may look to enact reforms, or maybe to reshuffle his cabinet or his administrative team. This is a possibility ahead of the next presidential election. I think internationally, Russia certainly will continue to be a major player in the world stage, flexing its military muscle and exerting its influence both in the near abroad countries such as Belarus and Ukraine, while also increasing its presence and its role in some of the hotspots such as Syria, Afghanistan, or Iran. As well, I think there's a sense in Russia that the West remains vulnerable, remains weak and divided. And in spite of sanctions, there's still really an opportunity for Russia to redouble its growing influence on the world stage.
Thank you very much. Final question. What does the election process in Russia mean for IFES's work elsewhere in Europe and Eurasia?
Well, there's two takeaways I want to share because I think they're potentially quite impactful. One, if we look at the limited use of the internet voting in Russia in the 7 electoral jurisdictions, this allowed up to 15.4 million people potentially to vote via the internet. Paper ballot voting, including at-home voting, was also permitted in these 7 districts. In some case, in one jurisdiction in Moscow in particular, where the Communist Party seemed to be polling quite strongly, at the end of the day, when the internet votes came in, it showed a decisive win for United Russia. So I think that the lack of the transparency, verifiability, and secrecy of the process are causes for concern among challengers to United Russia, as well as election monitors. And I think until, and this is a broader question about internet voting, until and unless such voting can be made transparent and independently verifiable, it's going to create doubt, particularly in a country such as Russia, where there is really a true deficit between in trust between voters and election management bodies. As other countries consider the use of technology, whether it be internet voting or something less, such as electronic maybe scanners or direct record electronic machines, or other adoptions of election technology, there will be the need to analyze the conditions in each of these countries and make context appropriate recommendations, which is really the prime directive of maintaining transparency and confidence of voters, that being the legitimacy of the election. So that's something that we need to consider as IFES and other international assistance providers, looking at the expansion potentially of internet voting and appropriate use of technologies Oftentimes when a country sees a trend happening in one country, they try to emulate this. But there need to be really appropriate recommendations and guidance made. And very quickly, a second implication, which I think has really broad ramifications, and maybe we can expand upon it, is the banning of the smart voting app that Alex Navalny had developed, again via pressure exerted by the government on some of the big tech companies. And I think this really raises a question of freedom of speech versus combating disinformation. And as IFES, and as part of the elections, we really want to work on the issue of combating disinformation. And sometimes we have international tech companies as partners. Well, the ability of Russia to cow these companies into compliance by threatening them or threatening with fines or threatening their workers is really a concern. And we have to look at issues of free speech versus responsibility, of the companies to promote this freedom of speech in exchange of information. I think going forward, we have to regard how we interact with election management bodies in terms of supporting and combating disinformation versus the possibility that these efforts may be misused to the benefit or detriment of one political party or another.
Thank you very much, Anthony Bowyer. Next, we turn to Katerina Tertytchnaya at the University College London. So Katerina, we heard from Anthony about various aspects about the elections, but I'm wondering if you can help us to put the elections that we've just gone through in Russia in context.
Yes, hello everyone, and a very welcome, a big thank you to the organizers for this invitation. I think placing the election in context is very important, not just for understanding the numbers that we have seen at the end of the day, but also for understanding how this particular election compares to elections prior, for example, the 2016 Duma election. I think there are a few points to make as far as public opinion, at least, is concerned. And the first of those would be really that the Crimea consensus that we saw, shoring up support for the authorities in 2016 was long gone by 2021. This translated in poor approval ratings for the regime. For example, a month prior, presidential approval was around 61%, which is comparatively very low, even for leaders such as President Putin. And it also translated into very low electoral ratings for the dominant party, United Russia, as we have heard. In the months and weeks leading up to this election, opinion polls show United Russia scoring no more than 30%, and the Communist Party not that far behind it. Dissatisfaction with the regime and this general sense of disappointment with the state of affairs in Russia stemmed, of course, from many different factors. Economic decline was one of them. Growing prices was another, and we have heard about this already from the previous panelist, as well as this growing sense of dissatisfaction with the way the government had handled the pandemic. Of course, the regime was not oblivious to these events and to this growing dissatisfaction, and we have seen the Kremlin taking steps to perhaps preemptively address some of these grievances. For example, in the last few months, we have seen, this social agenda gaining rise, that there was money for children, for welfare, for pensioners, for the military that was spent, I think, in an attempt to shore up support. The creation of a new party, the New People Party, we have heard already, tried to, I think, provide an alternative to some of the voters, but that's only one side of the coin. The other side of the coin, and again, we have engaged with it already, is the increasing repression that was seen all across Russia. This is not to say that there was not repression before 2021. This was not the case, but there was a transformation in the nature and the strategies of repression used. The regime moved extremely harshly against opposition activists, against civil society organizations, against independent media, and the foreign agent law requiring individuals and organizations receiving foreign funding or otherwise to declare their status in every publication, for example, was only one example of this renewed repression we have seen in the last year. So these are just some of the developments that are worth having in mind as we try to understand the election.
Well, thank you. And one issue that there's been a lot of talk about, and Anthony did refer to it, is the smart or tactical voting initiative by the opposition. Well, how would you assess that initiative?
Of course, of course. So I think it is very difficult to say what the outcome of the election would have been without the smart voting campaign. You know, in politics, constructing such counterfactuals is hard. But I think also for our audience, it's worth saying that this is not the first time the non-systemic opposition in Russia tries to reach out and dampen the success of the ruling party. Already in 2011, that parliamentary election, Alexei Navalny said and called for voters to vote anybody but United Russia as an attempt, as I said, for the dominant party to receive a lower share of the vote. Now, we have seen this strategy increase and become more sophisticated over the years. Now, it was not just anyone but United Russia, but the opposition put in the time, the effort, the energy, and the people it needed in order to come up with this list of 225 candidates that it recommended people to vote for. So these were the second best candidates, the candidates that could win in a close race against the United Russia candidates. So I think that in of itself was very important. Of course, I have to say this was not uncontroversial. There are debates ongoing as to whether these ideological compromises, saying one should support communists or right candidates. These are ongoing, of course. But I think, given the circumstances, the initiative was very credible. We know that there are about 15 candidates supported by the Smart Voting campaign that have made it to the State Duma already. And I think this was also a reason to combat this widespread apathy among voters. So Smart Voting gave people a reason to show up and vote. It gave hope, if you like. The other thing that the Smart Voting campaign achieved was also, to force a response by the Kremlin. And I think that shows that there was concern about how widespread it was and how successful it had the potential to be. And we saw this response, as Anthony already mentioned, with this forceful ban of the app, with the authorities reaching out to Google, to Yandex, to Apple, requesting that the information is taken down from their websites. I think it's very worth noting as well, just to give an understanding of how widespread this was. When the list was posted on YouTube, within 24 hours, it had about 900,000 views, so there was real demand. But I think, there were results, both electoral, but also non-electoral, and those non-electoral results concentrated specifically in forcing the response of the Kremlin.
So we've had the elections, and if we look at what's happened afterwards, I mean, the outcome wasn't perhaps entirely surprising, but has the opposition contested the results since the elections were ended?
Yes, so the previous panelist has discussed this question already. So we have seen complaints filed, allegations of malfeasance at the time of the polls. We also know that independent voting monitoring groups, and we'll hear more from other panelists in a minute, recorded over 4,500 violations, and that was on Monday. Violations took place offline during face-to-face voting, and there are serious questions still about what happened online. I guess as an academic, what I would like to say is that we have seen a very systematic effort to prevent any independent analysis of the election results as they were coming in. There were many people that tried to, download from the Electoral Commission the results, analyze them, but it was extremely difficult to do so. It was impossible to do so because the data was somehow encrypted. The system was live, so it took a lot of time and effort and coordination to conduct any independent analysis of the data, and that was very, very sad indeed. The other thing I want to say, many observers were looking out to see, whether there would be discontent with the outcome of the elections, what the popular response would be. I think, unfortunately, electoral fraud does not convey new information, and I think there is an understanding amongst the widespread population that this is what it was. The Communist Party, I think on Monday they tried to stage a protest. It was a very small protest. It attracted a very small crowd. The protest was not authorized, and that is very important. The legal status of authorized events and unauthorized is vastly different, and the consequences of participation in those differ as well. But this is what we have seen, and I think this speaks to an earlier point we raised in our responses about the crackdown on the opposition. We know in political science that the vanguard, the leadership is very important for inspiring any type of collective action. And I think in this case, in this context, the opposition had long left Russia or was left in a very poor state to organize in any way.
So let me finish with a very simple question. Do elections matter in Russia?
Yes, thank you for this question. I think it's a very important question, not just for Russia, but for a range of countries that we see combining very authoritarian practices with these multi-party legislative elections that we have seen in Russia. My answer is yes, elections matter, and they do matter a lot. And they matter for different reasons. There is a reason that governments don't just, today ban elections. And I think this is because it is part and parcel of their democratic legitimation strategy. You have seen the coverage the election has attracted already. The government has used the results to say, look, there is proof that the people trust the government, that they support the mission that the country is on, they support its leadership. So there is this legitimization strategy and performance that elections play. It's not it's no accident that governments spend a lot of money, a lot of effort, resources, personnel in trying to manage the election and perhaps to make sure that the outcome is a desired one. Of course, the outcome of the election, we have said that the supermajority is important for the government to push through any changes it requires, be it constitutional or otherwise. But I think beyond that, there is also this signaling function that has been very important, and that's what allegations of fraud of a regime that's perhaps insecure and needs to conduct fraud help to challenge. So elections matter is my short answer, and they matter a lot, not just in Russia, but in many other governments and political regimes of this type.
Thank you very much, Katerina and Tertytchnaya. We turn to Roman Udot, co-chairman of the board of Golos. And of course, Golos has followed the parliamentary elections very closely. Tell us, what were your main findings?
You are muted, Roman.
Microphone, please.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that was better. Okay, thank you. We are election observing organization, and it would be very strange if we were not observing these elections and we're not coming with our conclusions. In spite of all the crackdown and pressure we went under during last years actually, but the pressure was increasing month after month in the run up to the elections. But still we managed to observe the campaigning. First of all, we do not recognize these elections as in compliance with the rules and the Russian obligations and the principles installed in the constitution. And even in the run-up to the election, it was obvious. And even if the elections were perfect voting, the voting process itself is not enough. It's not necessary. It's necessary, but it's not enough for free and fair elections. First of all, you should know that there was a huge crackdown on the electoral rights in Russia. It's up to 9 million of people are bereft of passive electoral right. They're not allowed to run. Partly it is because of their second citizenship, but which is more dangerous and painful for the life of the civil society is that they are not allowed for their political affiliations. For example, they were branded as supporters of extremists. Extremism means Navalny. His extremism was to call to participate in elections, to vote, to come to the polling stations as observers, candidates, electors, and so on. And these laws were enacted with retrospective or retroactive, it was retroactive laws, which is against the principles of the judiciary systems and a lot of conventions. But all of a sudden, these people became criminals, but with only one fine, with only one punishment, they are not allowed to run. Of course, it was a preset, it was organized explicitly for the elections, explicitly because the ruling party was out of popularity, and these activists and well-known persons, people, they were in a very good, they had very good chances of winning. Then there came the manipulation of legislation that came before the election, and again there's principles that the electoral laws should be stable, and they were not. Totally, it was just a chaotic period of time when the Duma was changing almost everything, and it's sometimes even hard for veterans to know the current Russian law, especially electoral law. Loss of independence of electoral commissions, they were set up as guardians of people's choice of vox populi, but in reality they long ago turned into servants or accomplices of the ruling party or forces that are employed by them to organize and safeguard their position in power. So electoral commissions is absolutely out of question if you are looking for support to defend people's electoral rights, which is our main goal and mission. And we have to go to courts, even police, but not electoral commissions, because they are already knows how to fend off our accusation, and they are biased. We have experienced a great drop in the number of registered candidates, which again, partly it was because of a crackdown or filtering out by the ruling authorities, the people with alternative or negative attitude to them, with alternative views. Partly it was because people began to realize that it is futile activity, and we lost a lot of people who are active, who are maybe wealthy enough to run, or have a lot of support, but still they understand that it's absolutely impossible to breach this wall around the polling stations. Government, it was a huge crackdown on the freedom of speech since the beginning, even at the end of the previous year. There was a lot of it was a witch hunting related to such term as foreign agent. A lot of foreign agent appeared. A lot of this label was applied to media, to individual people, to organization, including my organization. But one of the problem it was for this press. They are afraid they lose their advertisement budgets, clients, and that some of them had to close. And again, breaching the ruling party breached their principles of transparency and accountability. You heard about e-voting. I would like to talk about online broadcast, and here and there you see the same tune. They reduce our ability to control, even to look on them. There was a huge pressure on journalists and observers, and we now are not allowed to even accredit our journalists, and we tried other ways to put our people into the polling station. I think that it's enough for you to understand this setup and environment which we had in these elections.
Well, thank you. So looking ahead, what do you think that these elections mean for the future of the Russian electoral system?
The main problem, as I mentioned before, and some other speakers mentioned, it is novelties, and that in this case, system is not stable. The credit and the respect for the ruling party is dropping, and they prevent the loss of power with all imaginable sources. For example, this is related to COVID, but it is not exactly and not truly connected to COVID. 3 days voting. 3 days voting is absolutely impossible to observe. Well, of course it's possible. Of course it's possible. It's very hard to observe. It's hard to find people who are free enough, volunteers to observe elections. And it's not actually 3 days voting, it's 2 nights voting, and during the night you don't know what happens to the ballots, and we already have cases and proofs and evidence that envelopes were changed and so on. We now run into another problem, e-voting. E-voting is even more dangerous than 3 days voting, and we now have Moscow's example when the tables were turned 180 degrees, and the winners became losers and so on. And it went out of, it's like a god out of machine. We don't know who elected these people, how it was done. People are still investigating this case, and they don't understand. We had previously a very powerful tool actually for the civil society. It's a video broadcast, and we were able to record the videos. The length was, let's say, 12 hours, but during these 12 hours we were able to count how many people come to the box, and we were able to verify the official data with official video. It was absolutely impossible for them to contradict our findings. We proved that the turnout, at least falsifications that where turnout was affected, was widely spread, and sometimes it's up to 5%, 5 times more. Official data was higher, 5 times more than real turnout. And in this case, they switched this broadcast, this public broadcast off. So in this case, we are in a sense blind, and we don't know what we were not able to see as it was previously. So these changes, these novelties are very dangerous for our electoral system.
Thank you very much. And I'll ask you a final question. And this is an issue that both our panelists so far have touched upon, but I really want to hear your view on this. What is the situation for civil society groups in Russia wishing to engage in a political discussion, and especially in electoral observation?
It's very harsh times, and it's very hard for them to survive. But the harshness of these times is corollary to the very good opportunity. I think that people began to realize that the ruling party is not as effective as they thought about it in the beginning of 2000s, and a lot of political activities, and people are very brave. it's not. It was mentioned that the communists were not able to gather a crowd, even even if they are in Moscow, even if where their victories were stolen and people in Moscow are very active, but it's because of very harsh fines, very high fines, and unproportionally high fines and punishment for even peaceful gatherings. But still people are going on the streets, protesting, being arrested, and so on. So it's a very interesting situation. It's a not window of opportunity, but a lot of, how to put it, expectations. A lot of even new people came into the parliament, I think, due to that fact that, of course, it was approved by the Kremlin, but still it shows that people are ready for changes, and that's why the authorities are so repressive, oppressive, and so on. When everything was fine in Russia, like after Crimean annexation, it was an elation among the people. Ruling party didn't use such harsh measures to stay in power. Now they are dying the last trench, last ditch, and that shows that they are days doomed, I think, and this monopoly on the power should go.
Thank you very much, Moderator, and I'm sure there'll be many questions for you in our Q&A session. But let us turn to Stefanie Schiffer, who's Executive Director at European Exchange. So, Stefanie, we've heard from our panelists so far. Can you tell us more about the legal and administrative restrictions on independent citizen election observation in the Russian Federation today?
Yeah, thank you for being here. So I will talk about this question of transparency of the elections. I think there are two big challenges to these elections. One is the competitiveness, and we heard about that also from Öhman. Second problem is the transparency, which was extremely restricted, and I will talk about that. First, I would like to comment what Anthony Bowyer mentioned. These are two important points. One was mentioned the internet voting, which took place in Russia extensively in 7 regions with 13 million voters. I think this was really a bad practice, and I think it is really important to elaborate and to investigate that. How could that happen, and what would be the international consequences? I think this is an important job for an institution like IFES and others to dig deeper on that, because we already understand from first analysis that this was really a big intrigue in these elections, which turned results literally in at least 8 districts in Moscow. This is the first point. And the second point, also thank you, Anthony, for mentioning that. Also very important is the role of the internet companies. This was a scandal. This is really a scandal that the internet companies give in to such obvious pressure and chantage, maybe from the Russian side. I think this should not go through uncommented. I think this is something we really have to react, and we from EPD would really comment on that. We are a small NGO, but we would do that because I think this should not go through uncommented. But now I come to my points. I come back to the questions of the transparency of vote. Was a big problem. I think if we would not have these very courageous, knowledgeable and experienced citizen observers in Russia, we would know almost nothing about the quality of these elections in Russia. We had no video broadcasting, we had no international observation, and big efforts to hide the real process and the quality of these elections. So I think we cannot overestimate the role of the citizen election observers here, and they also have been so much hindered. So I come to very brief. The situation for citizen observers in Russia is really one of the hardest we can see in our regions where we work from EPD. Only Belarus is worse. So the main actors in Russia have been declared foreign agents. This was mentioned several times. Foreign agent is not only a legal problem, it's also, you see, it's a post-Soviet society. In Russia, hearing somebody is a foreign agent, this echoes the darkest times of Soviet history, of Stalinism. So being called a foreign agent really interrupts you and blocks you from getting out to people, getting to administration. This is a very hard point. Still, Association Golos was labeled a foreign agent in 2012. Independent Movement Golos, which was set up as a consequence, was also labeled a foreign agent just some weeks before the elections. Still, the observers in Russia managed to observe. They have developed manifold technical apps, tools for internet training, for internet reporting, like the Karta Narusheni with internet reporting, what was mentioned already, video observation, very knowledgeable tools to analysis video observation, which was in the end impossible to use, and the statistical analysis of data. So we see that Golos became one of the technically most advanced observer communities worldwide. I think this is not exaggerated, and this is because we are forced to do it, because we are hindered and we have no access to precincts. So this is the situation, how these observations have been carried out. And I think it's remarkable that according to information from what we read, still during this election, 30 to 40,000 volunteers had access and used the training apps from citizen observers in Russia and participated in this observation. Estimate maybe 10 or 15,000 volunteers participated, Russian volunteers participated, and this is really remarkable. So this is just in brief, in a nutshell, to see how still in shrinking space Russian observers work in a very professional high level and provide us and assist us in getting information on this on the quality of these elections.
Thank you, Stefanie. When we were chatting about this earlier, you referred to the criminalization of international cooperation relating to election observation in Russia. Could you expand on that?
Yeah, this is something which we experienced, EPD, our organization. This is a network of 14 citizen election observers in the Eastern Partnership countries and the Russian Federation and EU. So it's a European network of citizen election observers. We have been declared undesirable foreign organization by the Russian Ministry of Justice some weeks ahead of the presidential elections in Russia in 2018. This means that since that time, we had to stop any cooperation with Russian citizens, because any Russian citizen who has any sort of relation, this is the very vague formulation in the law, with us and with me personally and with my colleagues, may be subject to high fines and even to criminal persecution, to prison terms up to 6 years. So since that time, I do not call a Russian election observer, I do not meet them, I even do not put a like under a post, because there is already evidence that people have been sentenced to jail in Russia for internet communication with undesirable foreign organizations. This is a really very brutal, a very, very hard strike against international cooperation. Still, I have to say that there is a huge, and this is important, there is a huge international, or even a worldwide community around the globe of citizen election observers. And this is something we have been developing. We are a member of GNDEM, of a global network of election monitoring organizations. We have very good contacts to any European domestic citizen election observers. And this is something we definitely have to develop, because the more the more the authoritarian regimes in Europe's neighborhood will beat against independent citizen activity, the better we have to be coordinated, the better we have to work together, and the smarter we have to develop our strategies. I would say this is working. If you read newspapers in anything, I think any article you read about Russian newspapers, you will find a quotation and an assessment from the citizen election observers. And this is a result of this very good network which has already been developed. So the Kremlin cannot silence citizen election observer. It can make life difficult. It can make life even dangerous for them, very dangerous, but they will not silence them. And I think this is a very important message we have to bring and we have to pass through.
Thank you for that. One topic that we haven't really touched upon so far is the use of shadow observation or fake observation that has been organized through the State Duma. what does that mean, and what's the purpose of that?
It's a very nasty development, and unfortunately we have really to be clear that this is a European problem, and we have to figure it out and clear up with it in Europe. Series and big groups of European parliamentarians go on an invitation to Azerbaijan, to Russian Federation, to unrecognized territories like Crimea, like Eastern Ukraine, and they provide false evidence or false testimony about the quality of elections to state-run local mass media. So they want to irritate the voters in these countries. Even they go to mass media before the closing of a precinct, of a voting cabin, of a voting places. So this is an intentional disinformation, and the Kremlin has put big efforts and resources in setting up this network. The two key person, I would say, is Leonid Slutsky. Slutsky, he is chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the State Duma, and it is Vyacheslav Volodin, who is now the chair of the head of the Duma, of the State Duma. They are key figures, but they are not the only ones. In our side, in Europe, it's most the far right, sometimes also far left parties that deploy their parliamentarians from European Parliament, from national parliaments, from regional parliaments to observe and whitewash fraudulent elections. During these elections, I would say EPD and some other organizations research that and voice it out. We have set up a database with around almost 500 entries, and we write letters to all parliaments that are affected. As a consequence of these common efforts, also with the European Parliament, where the DEG is very active also to work on that. As a consequence of that, the Kremlin during these elections has not deployed international observation missions from Western European countries. They have just invited individual experts, come as an expert, are not accredited at the Central Election Commission, but still go to the precinct, go to the mass media and tell your impression. So we see Kremlin is reacting on that. And on our activities, they are reacting, and they do it in order to protect the politicians, because the politicians, and this is already a consequence of this advocacy work, are now already blacklisted. Several politicians, European members of parliament are blacklisted, and now they are prohibited to participate in election observation. So I think we have to go on, struggle and work on that, and we have to be clear that by that integrity of elections are undermined if we do not take action in that sense.
Thank you very much, Stefanie Schiffer from European Exchange. We will now open for questions to our panelists, and please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to type in questions. While you're doing that, I will read out some questions that have already come in, and I'll address the first one that has come in to Katerina Tertytchnaya. The person asks about an op-ed in an international paper describing Russia, and I'm quoting now, describing Russia moving from authoritarian rule to dictatorship. The increased repression was meant not only to limit, but prevent any kind of political opposition. Do you think this description of the development is appropriate or an overstatement of the case?
Thank you for this question. I think it has always been extremely difficult for political science to label Russia in any given way. The complexities of the regime are many and varied. And not just of the Russian regime, but I think increasingly so of many governments around the world that we see, like Russia, combining very authoritarian practices, very repressive practices with multi-party elections. Now, political science will tell us that, you know, what makes the difference between electoral autocracies and closed dictatorships are a few things, like the presence of independent media in a country, the presence of elections, although, you know, neither free nor fair, and an independent judiciary that can at times challenge the decisions taken by state authorities and indeed the state itself. There is no doubt, and I think there's consensus that over the recent years, and I would say, from 2004 onwards, Russia has been on a downward spiral when it comes to all of these domains: political freedoms, civil rights, and all of the above. Independent media, we have heard repeatedly today, have found themselves under increased pressure in recent years. As I said earlier, I'd say what has changed, and I think this is extremely alarming, is the extent, range, and nature of repression we have seen the regime used against civil society in the past few months. And I will agree with previous speakers that this is exactly a sign of weakness. We know that repression has a lot of costs. It is extremely costly for those who use it. It is costly not just because it makes it harder for people to express their views and makes them fearful of speaking out, but it also makes it tricky because it changes the relationship between the personalist ruler and the elites on whom the ruler relies to use repression. I think this is a terrible sign of maybe things still to come if the situation continues as it is. But yes, so my short answer would be there's been a downward spiral, and I unfortunately there doesn't seem to be a foreseeable end to it. Thank you for the question again.
Thank you very much. I wish we could have a more optimistic answer, but we have to look at the reality that is in front of us. We have had many questions come in, so I will only be able to pick a few of them. One that has been addressed to Roman is an issue that's been raised several times during our discussion and also in other discussions about the elections, and that regards the electronic or the internet voting or electronic voting. Roman, just asking what's your take on this, briefly?
It's hard to do briefly because I've been spending nights and days trying to analyze the situation, and absolutely obscure. Still, it's absolutely obscure. It looks like a sort of a scam, financial scam sometimes, and it was organized, at least in Russia. I'm not 100% against the e-voting, but I know for sure that some European countries decided to stop that idea. Germany, Netherlands, and so on. So it's very dangerous. People don't trust it. But in Russia, it is already have a criminal tinge in it, and it was absolutely shameful when authorities, as I presume, they saw that they lose power, they're going to lose seats to the communists, to the smart voting candidates, and they began this campaign. The campaign was organized on a large scale. People were entered into activities, into e-voting by lotteries, raffles, prizes, and so on. It looked ugly. It was not obviously not transparent, and it was obviously not honest. Putin went on TV screen and voted online, and it was filmed presumably at the 10th of September, before the voting began, and it looks like it is a setup. Then came the E-Day, and as it was several times mentioned, the observational website was down. Nobody was even able to observe what's going on. And all of a sudden, they presented us with a file, huge file of 7 gigabytes, and of obscure origin. They said it Bitcoin, but it's not technically exactly Bitcoin technology. It's a master key technology. That means that the file belongs to them. It's not distributed. It's not verifiable. And as I got out of machine, ex machina, they have those winners, and hey presto, we even don't know who elected for them. And now people are starting to look into data, their complaints, communist complaints, people try to overrun this decision in courts, but already Moscow, at least Moscow's election commission decided that no, everything is fine, the parliament is elected. But Moscow is more or less in a good situation, because at least we had that observation website which went down, and absolutely it was more or less a fake make-believe website. But other regions even didn't have that attention or that observation. So I think that's it's absolutely impossible. It should be cancelled, and maybe even elections should be rerun in this situation.
Thank you very much, Roman. Anthony Bowyer, I have one question for you. That's actually three questions that will come in. Can you say more about what we know about what we think is the real turnout in these elections? Second part, what about young people? What are they feeling? What are they thinking in relation to the elections? And thirdly, and I realize we don't have all the figures yet, but what about the participation of women in the elections? Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, thanks, Magnus. I think there's a suspicion that the real turnout was quite a bit lower than officially or preliminarily reported. Official results are due out today with numbers, including, I suspect, data on the demographic breakdown of voters. If officially the election saw 52% turnout, there have been statisticians who suggest it was quite a bit lower, maybe even 38%. And I think, you know, to a degree, there's certainly an inflation. We know that there's been a longstanding problem of voter coercion and solicitation of votes. This happens at a really in an old-fashioned way. If you look at, for example, abuses of the mobile ballot box, this is something we've seen for 30 years, basically. But where there isn't a defined list of those who've requested to vote at home versus the number of ballots and votes that are solicited and returned at polling stations, oftentimes these aren't properly observed, or the complaints that are made based on observations are dismissed or somehow whitewashed. That may not account for such a huge percentage, but it certainly plays a role in the inflation of the voter totals at the precinct level. I think, as colleagues, fellow panelists on the call have suggested as well, with respect to the internet voting, there are pretty huge numbers of voters in Moscow Oblast. It's certainly not necessarily clear how many people may have really voted by their will through the internet. I think there's perhaps a degree of inflation there as well. But certainly the ruling party wants to demonstrate that they have a mandate, and perhaps the inflation of numbers not too great, not to the levels that we saw in some Central Asian countries in the past, but to a degree where there's a half of the electorate turning out and maybe half voting for the ruling party, roughly speaking, is acceptable, and it may suggest that they acknowledge there are issues in the country that need to be addressed. They recognize that. But it's not, they don't want to show that the level has fallen to a degree where you can allege voter apathy and then make the equivalency of a dissatisfaction with the ruling party. On the issue of youth, I mean, it's very interesting. As I mentioned, I mean, there's a great number of voters now that are post-Soviet, if we can say, in their experiences. They are rabid users of the internet. They tend to want different things, and they're tired of corruption. And with respect to forms of voting, I mean, it's an interesting interplay when you look at what youth today want in any country, and this is easy to access processes via smartphones and things. And so, we may really see a legitimate interest in voting through apps or through internet, but as panelists have suggested, there's not a way to guarantee the security or the legitimacy of that process. So it is a perilous endeavor particularly when it's not verifiable. But one of the messages that's been used during this campaign relentlessly is trying to promote a sense of duty and patriotism among all citizens, particularly young persons, in continuing to promote a continuity and instill a pride in government and in country. There are a lot of imagery used about Ukraine and comparing the United States and its experiences in undermining Russian interest and trying to instill this. I think, though, as well, I mean, the reason we haven't seen a protest is for the reason panelists also have suggested, that there's a steep price to be paid now for coming out in public. Even those who may risk it, they don't necessarily want to end up in jail, or to they don't see enough critical mass yet, maybe, where it's comfortable to do so. I think there's a great amount of dissatisfaction among young people. It's maybe not manifested visibly or evidently during these elections, but I would suggest that there's a very large degree of apathy that has come through in this. When you kind of run these numbers through the ringer, you can certainly see this among young people whose interest in their futures is not what it is necessarily for older voters, who tend to be much more active. If you talk about voting, people who tend to vote consistently, it's typically the babushki, older women, who are very adamant voters and very consistent voters, and they want stability. They don't want to see chaos or roll the dice on opposition that may not be able to pay pensions in 6 months or 12 months. As far as numbers of women based on age category breakdowns, that's something we'll have to wait and see what the official numbers are. Then, based on what they say, we may be able to read or interpret them in a particular way.
Thank you very much, Anthony. And what I think will need to be the last question to Stefanie Schiffer. Are European countries and the European Union doing enough to emphasize the shortcomings of the democratic and electoral processes in Russia?
Yeah, this is a very important question, and we have to, I would say, when it comes to fight against fake observation, which is a small aspect, but it's quite still an important aspect, we are moving too slowly. We are researching, we are writing letters, we are talking to parliaments. Things are moving slowly. European Parliament acts, pace of the Council of Europe started. National parliaments are they don't want to touch the topic. We have to understand fake observation is an entry door to international political corruption. And if we research people in our database, we find them in several corrupt deals with the Russian Federation. So we have really to investigate that. And Germany has deficiencies in transparency of donation of party finances. This is for a year standing claim from ODIHR to our elections. And before our Bundestag elections, which will be on Sunday, no party wanted to raise the topic. So we have huge deficiencies in Germany, in other European countries. We have recently made a research on 7 European countries, 6 of 7 European countries made citizen observers in European EU member states say that transparency of finances is a problem in their country. So we have definitely to work on that. And another point, Russia is a member of the Council of Europe. I think we cannot say we don't care how this delegation is voted, is legitimized. We cannot say we don't care whether these people have been elected or falsified into the parliament. If we do that, we lose our credibility, and the Council of Europe will stop to be a club of democracies and it will become a club of kleptocracies. Sorry for being so bluntly. I think this is a serious question to us.
Thank you very much, Stefanie. We have come to the end of our time together. I want to thank all our panelists for your input and all of you for participating in this event. I also want to thank again USAID for supporting our discussion, our fantastic interpreters, and my IFES colleagues for preparing and implementing this event. So our next discussion will take place on the 27th of October, and it will focus on a topic very close to what we've discussed today, because on next time we will talk about the influence of the Russian regime over other countries and their political processes. So I will see you all on the 27th of October, and until then, stay safe.